Welcome into Point Blank, brought to you by Fitz Roofing. I'm Brandon Strange, joined as always by ESPN Houston's Joel Blink of the Press Box. Doc Rivers has been relieved of his head coaching duties in Los Angeles after another disappointing series in the playoffs. What are the odds that Doc Rivers becomes the head coach of the Houston Rockets?
Brandon, I think it depends on which perspective you're looking at it from. I think from the standpoint of what are the odds from a standpoint of a fit, of a guy that could do a good job for the Houston Rockets, and I think those odds are way up. What are the odds he picks the Rockets? I think the odds are a lot lower than people really realize, and that's simply because the Rockets aren't the Rockets of a couple years ago, and I give you the free agency example where everyone a couple years ago, including veterans that were getting bought out, wanted to play for the Rockets. Kenneth Faried, and then Austin Rivers, and a lot of guys that really helped this team out became available and immediately said, I want to play in Houston. Well, that's not the case anymore. There are other teams with other opportunities that set a better table for a coach to succeed. The two that are being rumored out there for Doc Rivers, the New Orleans Pelicans, loaded with draft picks and young talent, starting with Zion Williamson. And that's a very, very attractive place for a lot of coaches to look at. And then the team that's been rumored to be linked to Mike D'Antoni, Doc Rivers might actually jump over Mike D'Antoni for the Philadelphia 76ers job because he's been on the East Coast in Boston. He's proven that he knows how to win. And the East, as we've mentioned, is not as strong as the West. There's a good opportunity for him there to capitalize real quick on a less than stellar Eastern Conference and a team that's already loaded with talent and take them a long way right away in the case of the Sixers, as opposed to looking at a Rockets roster. And when you look at it, you go, yeah, they have two superstars. But the whole roster, as we've talked about in the past, is geared for small ball. And a lot of coaches look at it and go, no draft picks, a lot of cap space used up by big contracts on the front end. And how do we change the roster and make some moves so that I can play the way I want to play? It seems like that's what's going to scare people off the most, aside from everything else, if you're a coach considering the Houston Rockets.
Doc Rivers has a ton of experience in the playoffs. He has coached a lot of big superstars, so it would be natural that that Houston would go after him. What could he bring to this team? What do you think this team looks like with a Doc Rivers imprint on it?
I love it. I said right away, and a lot of people gave me backlash on the radio show, if Doc Rivers is available, he should be the first guy you go after, and he should be the only guy you focus on until he tells you that he's not interested, simply because he's got the pedigree. He's won the championships. As you mentioned, he's coached the Big Three in Boston. He's coached two stars with the Clippers. He's even got that young upstart Orlando team where he had some stars. But he knows how to coach, and flip side is players have to respect him because he's proven as a player, as a coach, as a champion. So therefore, when he comes in and he speaks, you have to listen and you have to follow what he brings to the table because it's worked, and it's worked in multiple locations. So I think that's the biggest thing. The other names we're talking about are guys, yeah, Ty Lue has won, but he won, and a lot of people will say it's all because of LeBron James. So if Ty Lue comes in, he will have some respect. But other names that we've been talking about that might be getting a look for the Rockets job are either first-time head coaches or longtime assistants that basically have coached other places, but not nearly the pressure cooker with the expectations of a Houston Rockets team. Doc covers all the bases, checks all the boxes. He's the guy that's going to come in and immediately establish culture, system, and respect. And I think that's what this Rockets team sorely needs.
Doc Rivers does have some of his own baggage attached to him, though. I want to ask you about that. But before I do, why don't we get a word in for our sponsors at Fitz Roofing?
Yeah, if you guys have anything going on with your roof right now, a leaky roof, or you're thinking about putting a new roof on your house or your business, there's only one place to call. It's Fitz Roofing. They're locally owned and operated in Houston. And the best part about it is they do free, no obligation inspections. All you got to do is pick up the phone. 832-521-3001. You get in touch with them, and they come to you to do that free, no obligation inspection. 832-521-3001. Fitz Roofing, making a difference one home at a time.
There are some concerns that do surround Doc Rivers. He has famously blown 3-3-1 leads in the playoffs. Is that a concern, especially walking into a Rockets team that's also maybe or maybe not underachieved in the playoffs?
Yeah, I think it's a concern, Brandon. I think the one thing that makes it not a bigger deal than it could be with the Rockets is Doc's criticisms come from a lot of load management. He rested Kawhi a lot last year. He rested playoff P maybe more than he should have. And then with all the rest that they got, the criticism was when they got to the bubble and when it was time to really play, they weren't where they should have been as a team, and those guys weren't as good as they were expected to be. You don't have that problem with the Houston Rockets. Russ wants to play all the time, but they're always being safe medically with some of the issues he's had. James, you're never going to have to say, hey, James, I need you to play in this game. He's going to want to play in every single game. So you take the load management questions and you erase them and wipe them off the board. Now, in terms of adjustments and what it means in a playoff series to have that final closer mentality to put a team away when you have a lead, I think that's something that's still a legitimate concern. I think it comes down to his assistants. And I think the bigger thing is, in the past, Doc is kind of like the Bill O'Brien of the NBA. He's had ultimate control. He's been in charge of all of basketball operations and personnel, even if there is a general manager in place, to make the decisions. Here, if he came in, he'd have to work with Daryl Morey. Daryl Morey would be the guy that would decide the roster and make those tough decisions so that Doc didn't have to. Maybe that means he focuses more on coaching, and maybe that means you get more out of him as a coach. I don't know. The concerns are valid and legitimate, but I think that some of them are erased by the fact that you have two guys that really want to play in Russ and James, and you have a general manager established who's going to be the end-all, be-all in basketball operations.
Tracy McGrady, Kevin Garnett, Chris Paul. Doc Rivers has coached, some big names in this league, some of the biggest names in this league. And so coming to the Rockets, he would coach another one of those in James Harden. How do James Harden and Doc Rivers, how would they get along?
Well, that's an interesting dynamic that I think before you make a decision on head coach, it would take a conversation amongst the powers that be, mainly Tillman, Daryl, James, and Doc, and maybe even Russ, even if that's a separate conversation, because you have to be able to get to a common ground. Doc's going to demand that you play defense. Doc's going to demand some things that James isn't going to be used to hearing, and he's not going to be really open to, I don't think, at least initially, from any coach, because of the fact that, as we've talked about, James feels this is his team, his organization, and that they're going to go through him no matter what they do with coaching and other things. If you bring in Doc, you're going to have two type A strong personalities that are going to butt heads. So I think before it gets to the ink drying on the paper and a signature on a contract, there's some tough conversations that have to be had with whoever coaches this team, because you have to be on a common ground with James and Russ and then Daryl in terms of your roster. And I think that James is going to be a guy you're going to have to win over. I don't think it's going to be where he just lays down and says, yeah, I haven't done these things the right way. Yeah, I maybe shouldn't have forced Kevin McHale out. Yeah, maybe I could have done some more on the other end of the floor. I don't think that's James Harden, and I don't think he's ever been that way. So asking him to do that now might be a tall order, and like I said, it would take some conversation.